means to ease the pain, so to speak. And yet, my mother had 6 kids in an area where there was no kind of pain relief. And in fact, I was a very difficult birth. The midwife had to use forceps and turn me around inside, and I came out with a big lump on my head. And, so yet, she had another baby after me. So somehow we often forget the pain that we've endured, and we keep chasing the pleasure that we hope to secure, and quite often we'll come through, I grew up in a kind of wealthy, poor family. We started off poor, had a bit of money for a while, and then lost it all. And then you realize, you start to by being in the world and the conditions, we all think, oh, I need to have money. I need to be famous. Today with the internet, all the children seem to think they have to be famous, and do all these kind of gimmicky things, in order to have a decent life. Whereas actually what we know is what makes life worthwhile is a bit of shelter and a bit of food and good relationships, and being kind of humble, because, if you've got a big ego, you always need to feed the ego. So if your focus is to this idea that if you just get everything right, get the right degree, if you get the right job, if you get the right partner and the right money, your life is going to be okay. But the reality is it might be, you might achieve those things and it might be very pleasant, but eventually it'll fall apart. So early on when I was a young nurse, I worked in nursing homes. So as some people say, God's waiting room, for the Christians. They're just sitting there waiting till they pass on, so to speak. And I used to work in kind of like, there's poor nursing homes and there's wealthy nursing homes. But what I found was that whether they were in a poor nursing home or a wealthy nursing home, how many, people, how few visitors many of the nursing home residents would get, whether they came from a very wealthy family or a very poor family. If they were in a very wealthy family and it started to look like they were about to die, then all the relatives show up. Please, can I give you a glass of water? Oh, do you need something for your head? Can I massage your feet? Because they're all hoping to get on the will. So, but they're not there out of their love and compassion. And even when the parents have been very, compassionate and generous to their children, not all the children who come forward reflect that compassion and kindness that their parents have shown them either. Sometimes children can turn on their parents. In fact, today, there's a lot of what we refer to as elder abuse. So you've got, I work in mental health services just for children and families, and I also have a lot to do with older people's care. And, you get these terrible stories of children that move back into their parents' home and then, basically lock their parents in the spare room and take over everything else, and start to drain their bank accounts. And, so there's all these new laws now to try and protect older people from abuse from their own children as well as others and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say is that there is no ultimate security in that. And that's what the Buddha was trying to say as well. Everything is impermanent. And that's once you start to get a real feeling for the fact that things are impermanent, they may be good today, but bad tomorrow. They may be bad today, but good tomorrow. Because it's always in motion. And if you reflect back on if you had the ability to reflect back on your own life day by day, how many good days have you had? How many kind of boring, maybe can't remember days, and how many kind of really bad days, and yet you've survived them all. You're still here today, and you've got other days coming up that are going to be good and boring or really exciting and enjoyable, or you just wish it was over, so to speak. And it can be little things like your performance review at work, or an exam result, or winning the lottery, or losing, or having a car accident. Personally, what I've found in the last couple of years is over the last 2 or 3 years, my health's taken a blow on a few times. So all the things that I took for granted. I grew up very active, running around, swimming, running, bike riding, playing sports, you know, I was very fit up until I was about 50. And then I made the mistake of taking a senior management job. And ever since then, my health's gone, started to grind my teeth in my sleep. So I thought, you know, and everybody always says, oh, you're always so calm, you're always so relaxed. And then it's like, I'm, you know, a month later, I'm at the dentist because I've been grinding my teeth in my sleep and I've cracked a tooth, you know. And when the dentist told me that, I'm like, are you sure? Do you know, like I can't, because when you're asleep, you don't know you grind your teeth. But I woke up one morning and I was like, got an extra tooth. And when I went to the dentist, I'd cracked it. And it was like, you know, the kind of roots were coming through. So yes, I was pleased to get the job, but I didn't realize how much stress it would also bring into my life at the same time. And then bit by bit, all the things that I took for granted, you know, just being able to get up and run around and do things slowly started to fall away. And it's really because at the same time, you know, taking my job too seriously, I stopped doing things like, you know, exercising on a regular basis, eating as well as I could, you know. And then slowly, so my body loses its health and well-being. And all of a sudden, like last year when I was, you know, had to be hospitalized, I had a sort of spinal injury on my neck. And it was like, I was convinced I was going to end up disabled and, you know, in a wheelchair and have to let go of my job. So I came good again, you know, but for a while there, the fear was that everything that I had was going to be lost in that sense. But when I look back on what had happened, I realized it was my choices that had put me in that position. It was no one's fault but my own. And this is one of the aspects that helps us in our own practice, is starting to see how we contribute, not just to our success, because we all like to say, I did that, you know, when things go well, I got, you know, straight A's and I got promoted and I've got this much money in the bank and, you know, I've been on this great holiday. We all like to say, that's me, I did that. But when things go wrong, it's your fault. It's your fault, you know, your fault. It's never my fault, you know. But when I was laying there trying to recover, I started to see, oh, yes, that's why you're in this position. You know, you're not exercising and you've stopped moving around. You take the wrong things too seriously. You're not putting the time and the effort to nurture and condition. So the Buddha was incredibly intelligent because he understood the impact and the importance of conditioning, of the way that we do things. You know, so for instance, on a basic level, I was born in England, so I speak English. That's one level of conditioning. If I'm born in France, I'll speak French because that's the conditions of where I'm born. And so, you know, we're all born in kind of different conditions. I was very fortunate in one way because my parents weren't very religious at all. They, you know, I remember once asking to go to Sunday school and they're like, why do you want to go to Sunday school? You know, I thought it was important. And they're like, if you want to go, you can go, you know. So I didn't last long. I was quite lucky because it was he wasn't a priest, he wasn't even a pastor, he was like a bit like me at the moment, as a layperson who ran Sunday school. He didn't seem to like me, so I stopped going. So he did me a favor. And then when I came to Buddhism, it just made perfect sense to me. You know, I was listening to a talk and it's like, oh yeah, the person, yeah. So it all kind of like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And I remember walking out of my first Buddhist talk going, oh, well, I'm a Buddhist. You know, that was my beginning. I just identified as a Buddhist because the teachings rang a bell inside me. And so that was the beginning of my journey. It took another 8 years before I started to like then, you know, do proper things like meditation retreats and read more about it and come to understand. So as a layperson, the best thing we can do for ourselves is be a bit gentle because it's hard, it's impossible to be perfect. But the important thing is to be self-honest. So not just see what's the good things about you, but start to understand how we all have a shadow, you know, like, and so this is why we do things like chanting. Chanting's, yes, it's about, you know, being wholesome and celebrating the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, but it's also a way of conditioning the mind. Because when you're chanting, right, you're blocking the negative thoughts and you're watering the wholesome thoughts. and you're watering wholesomeness. It's a reminder. Chanting and the chants that we do, they remind us of the things that are important in terms of Buddhist practice, which is about developing kindness, compassion, the ability to be patient and to sit and to see and understand, not always reacting. So not following the impulses that come out of us. Starting to look at the impulses that come out of us. You know, my current practice is all about driving, because you know, every time I go, "Oh, you idiot," you know, I go, well, you're allowing that anger and irritation. You're watering anger and irritation. So you can start to see things a little bit different, like, oh, if I keep doing this, that's going to build that up. But if I do this, if I, you know, hold my breath, be patient, you can still be honest about feeling irritated. But if you don't give voice to it and if you don't act on it, then it becomes neutral. So it doesn't have the karmic impact once you start to challenge some of those unwholesome aspects of ourselves. And we've all got them. You know, it's not to say we're bad people, because we're not, but we're a mixture of good and bad, so to speak. And so what we're doing as lay people is trying to continue to cultivate, to nurture our wholesomeness, our goodness. And eventually that gets so strong because we condition it, that meditation becomes a lot easier. So if you look at it on a very basic level, when people first come to meditation and they sometimes they get beginner's luck, you know, like a lot of people will often say their first time, and I know several people like this, they do their, unlike Sujata, who obviously had a lot more karma up his sleeve, you know, they'll say, oh yeah, the first time I went to a retreat, it was amazing, it was fantastic, I had all these experiences. And then 10 years later, they're still trying to have them again, you see, because the mind gets in the way. Next time they meditate, see, beginner's luck is because you have no expectations, the mind's kind of open, right? And so suddenly it goes, oh, this is fantastic. And then once you start to come at it with a mind of expectation and not holding it, you can't get it. It's like that trick they do with the donkeys where they put the carrot out in front. So he's always chasing the carrot, but he's never going to get it. And as Ajahn Brahm teaches, you have to stop, because when you stop, the carrot swings up and then comes back and you can, the donkey can find it. So it's about pausing, taking a breath and doing things like that. But otherwise, we're always chasing. And when we're chasing things, we never catch them. It's a bit like the child in the back of the car on a long drive who goes, are we there yet? Are we there yet? You know, and we have a good meditation and go, oh, well, I must be, you know, I'm almost enlightened. I'm nearly there, you know. Even Ajahn Brahm has a very funny story about thinking he was in Brighton. Have you remember the one about the stinky fish shoe?
Yeah, please tell me.
Yeah. So Ajahn Brahm, you know, again, good karma. From the first time he started to meditate, had good meditation, really enjoyed it. So it made it very easy for him to ordain, because he looked around and he saw all the professors at the university. He was at a very famous university, and he looked around at the professors and he thought, none of them look happy, you know. And then when I go and listen to the monks, they look happy. So I think I'd rather be on their side, you know. So he ordained, and he, you know, as a young Englishman, he's suddenly in the highlands of Thailand, in the remote forest, you know, where mozzies are biting them continually, and you know, so he endured a lot of hardship, but his faith in the Dharma and the Buddha Dharma and the practice was so strong that he was able to endure that discomfort. And then, so one morning he has an incredible meditation, and he, you know, it's like everything's obviously gone well, and he goes, well, that I must be enlightened, you know, I'm enlightened. He's feeling pretty good, and to top it off, that morning, a very wealthy donor had arrived at the monastery and brought all this amazing food, you know, like great food, because at the time he said, you know, we would have to eat things like boiled frog, because that's what the villagers would offer, you know, that's all they had. So they would share what they had. So, you know, you'd get a bowl of rice and a boiled frog on top, if that. Sometimes it was just the rice. But this day, following his fantastic meditation, the wealthy donors come and he's brought all this food. It must be a sign. It's an omen, you know. So he was senior at the time, so he's like second in line to, I think it was Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah, of course, goes first because he's the abbot. And Ajahn Brahm's sitting there feeling, standing behind, feeling very, very good with himself. And there's this there's pork and there's beef and there's fish, and, everything's there. Ajahn Chah helped himself to his bowl, and then he picked up the other bowls and poured them all into the same bowl, mixed it all up.
It's all the same anyway.
Yeah. And so Ajahn Brahm, this is where the need for honesty comes in. Immediately felt this anger. What's he doing? Was he doing that? But then the second he realized he was angry, he also realized he wasn't enlightened. Because you can't get angry if you're enlightened. And so perhaps Ajahn Chah was able to read his mind and realize what he needed to experience at the time to help him, understand it's not about the ego. It's a letting go of the ego. So Ajahn Chah used to use this term, the one who knows. So often if you sit and think, you can start to, you can hear your chatter, right? And if you're having good thoughts or bad thoughts. So who knows whether you're having a good or bad thought? When you're having a good thought and you go, oh, that's a good thought. Or if you're having a bad thought and you go, that's a bad thought. Who knows that? Who's the one that knows? So if you start to reflect, well, you realize it's our awareness. It's our own awareness. Because someone has to know. If you're, it's like you can see it. I can see you. So there's an awareness. There's other people in the room. We have this capacity. So there's not a self. It's just it's a pure state of consciousness, awareness. And this is why the Buddha said the mind has no gender. So whatever a male can experience spirituality-wise, so can females, because the mind isn't male or female. It's awareness. It's consciousness. Experiences. And because we've got this ego and personality, this is where conditioning comes in. If we're born in most of the time, if we're born in a female body, we go, I'm a girl. Or if you're born in a male body, you go, I'm a boy. And then you start to develop a sense of self or an identity based on those things. And also we start to create our own self, because as a child, when we're like babies, again, babies, if you look at infants up until about 2, they're very natural. They're very spontaneous. They're just themselves. They're not thinking. Most children at that age are not thinking of themselves. They're just in the world, experiencing it and enjoying it. Hopefully, if they're children, babies are born into caring families and safe to be there, then they're kind of like just happy being in the world, And then gradually, if you've had children, around 3 or 4, they actually start to talk about the terrible 2s and the tantruming 3s. So this is when we start to have a sense of the world around us. And then you see children at times when they don't get what they want, suddenly it's like, because they want it. And so then the parent has to gradually help them to understand you can't have everything when you want it, how you want it all that time. The impulses start to take over, the sense of I, But to begin with, the world's all one place sort of thing, just mum and dad are in there. And then we start to, then depending on the world that we live in, we start to create an identity about who we think we are. So, my family came from England to Australia. Then growing up in Australia, you start to follow one particular football team, and, or in my day, you were either a Holden fan or a Ford fan, so to speak. There was all these kind of little beliefs and things that you used to say who you were, and we keep doing that. And then we, as we get older, we start to get better plans. You think one day I'm going to be this, that, the other. Today, everyone talks about manifestation. You just got to believe it enough, visualize it, and then it'll happen. How? It's not magic. It's not just, you're not going to wake up in the morning and have, $1 million in a bag in front of your house. So there are steps, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong, because everybody thinks they can be rich and famous at some point. In my day, everyone thought they could be a musician or in a rock band, So we start to follow these dreams, And then, some people want it's like the lottery. Millions of people buy into the lottery. Only one person usually wins it. And even then, some weeks, no one wins it. Yet all that money goes into it. And it's all based on this idea, these dreams, these, hopes and wishes that don't really have any kind of basis in reality. And again, if you believe in manifesting, well, if you're a poor person in another part of the world, in the middle of Australia or middle of Asia or the middle of India or the middle of China, it doesn't matter how many times you manifest, you're likely not even to get to go to school. Many millions of children never even get to go to school. How are they going to manifest? So using awareness, we can start to see things as they are. So this is why at the beginning with that mindfulness, that's about cultivating mindfulness. And this is the thing that we can do this is where we should start as a layperson. We start with mindfulness. And we can start with the teachings, so we know, so when things don't go wrong, well, that's proving the Buddha's teaching, isn't it? There is suffering because we suffer when we don't get what we want, or we get what we don't want. This proves the teachings of the Buddha. There is suffering, and impermanence. So these things are really hard. And once you start to realize your own impermanence, this body won't last forever. It's like the Buddha says, the body is prone to sickness, old age, and death. The mind, not so much. The mind can become feeble and fall apart if we don't give it the right causes and conditions. And more research shows how our diet affects dementia. Whether you end up with Alzheimer's or not, you can do a lot about that. It's not, you might still have a genetic vulnerability, as they say. But if you eat the right diet and do a bit of exercise, then you're probably in good shape. It's probably not going to happen. It's like heart disease. If you like having chips and burgers every day, you're probably going to get a heart condition. If you like to smoke, you're probably going to get a lung condition. So our actions, our choices affect the way that we end up every day. And like every day, so we forget. It's a bit like the sand in the hourglass. When we turn it upside down, even though it looks like the sand's going very fast, it's still falling one grain at a time. So every day, we're kind of watering and seeding our own garden, if you like. And the way that garden looks at the end of our life depends on what we've watered. What are the seeds that we've planted? So it's important to think, just because we say, we're Buddhist and we want to be, have wisdom and intelligence and virtue and peacefulness, we have to work towards that, because we're not designed to just have it, arise, unless you've got a lot of good karma, if and you are. So I think who's Ajahn Dunn, who's does a lot of support for Venerable Kemavaro up at Wat Buddha Dharma. He's a very famous timer. And apparently, because he's considered enlightened, and apparently, he ordained at 20, and according to the Sangha, they considered him enlightened within 5-6 years. But you've got other monks that have spent 30 years and then disrobed, because they've never achieved what they hope to achieve in that sense. And that's why it's kind of important to let go of thinking a goal. The good fortune I had in spending some time on monasteries was watching a lot of young men ordain. And I think probably 90% of them at some point disrobed within about 5 years. And you could almost tell who was going to make it and who wasn't, and because they had unrealistic expectations. So they've come from, living in the lay life and probably being like a lot of Western young men, drinking and partying and stuff. Not all of them, but, many of them did. And so they had this kind of desire, like me, that, well, if you go and live on a monastery and ordain, that'll fix everything up. You'll be a monk, and then you'll be virtuous and wise and enlightened. you know, and then what happens is they put the robes on. You've got to be up at 4 a.m. That's hard work. Anyone here get up at 4 o'clock every morning? Even doing it once a week is a bit of an achievement, isn't it? Then you've got to sit in meditation for 6-8 hours a day. You're only going to get fed once a day. There's no TV. There's no movies. There's no distractions. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to spend all day talking with each other. You know, there's a very strict routine. And you see, when our mind is untrained and unconditioned, it's hungry for the 5 senses, you know, to be fed. We like to, you know, feel things, taste things, smell, see, and stuff like this. And so when we're less kind of evolved, the 5 senses tend to be the dominant force in people's lives. So they're ruled by the desire for food and shelter and comfort and, you know, pleasure, because that's what the 5 senses do. So to get beyond the 5 senses, we do need to be able to start to say no to ourselves, you know, and to put up with not getting what we want all the time. And having spent, you know, enough time on monastery, I added it up once and I realized that from 30 to 40, that 10 years, I'd spent in total nearly a year and a half just on monasteries and living on, you know, either Wat Buddha Dharma or Ajahn Brahm's monastery in Perth. And even with all that, you know, gives you that opportunity to start to calm down and see things as they are. It's a bit like the fog clears for a while and you can see. And so meditation is one of those things that helps us to sort of allow the mind to clear and then start to see things, you know, as they are. If you're always trying to see things the way you want them to be, then you'll always be a bit deluded and you'll always get a bit irritated when it doesn't work out, you know, or very irritated, you know. So the more that you can be at ease with the way things are and just accept some days will be easier than others, some days will be pleasant, some days will be unpleasant. Just don't panic. Just don't panic and stay, you know, just start to be aware and see what is the cause, what is the condition of this, where is it coming from? So we can gently start to explore our own minds and the teachings of the Buddha. You know, so if we go back to the 4 Noble Truths, is it true? Is life suffering? So we look and we go, oh yes, it's suffering, but sometimes it's fantastic. But what was the next teaching? It's impermanent. Is that true? So when I had a bad day, did it last? Yeah, sometimes it lasted for a month, you know. And then when I've had a good day, yeah, sometimes it's lasted for a month, you know. So you start to see with your own life the truth of the Buddha's teachings, that things are impermanent, they come and they go, you know, that there is suffering in the world. You know, our lives in the West, we're very fortunate in the West because, you know, I think about, oh, what would I like to eat today? Do I want this to drink or do I want, you know, that to drink? I think I'd like to live there. I might go for a holiday there. You know, so we have all these kind of choices available to us that not everyone has. But it would be a mistake to think that everyone's life is like ours, because it's not. You know, and if some people have bad lives, it's not necessarily, you know, they may have been born in the conditions that prevented them from having a good life. As I said, I work with children and families, and I know that not every child comes into the world with a caring family. You know, even from a very young age, even as babies, they endure incredible pain and suffering when they're with people that don't know how to care for others. That, you know, if you've got a mother that doesn't know, or a father that doesn't know how to control his anger, or a mother that doesn't know how to care for others because she wasn't cared for herself, you know. So you start to see that, you know, we're not all born equally with the same kind of opportunities. So therefore, I can't claim credit. You know, I was very lucky to be born. You know, I didn't have no one came up to me when I was, before I was born to say, now, where would you like to be born? Who would you like to be your parents? What sort of job do you want? How long do you want to live? You know, all of these sort of things. No one came to me. I just found myself here and it's like, oh, what's going on? You know?
Oh, you like to look right? Oh.
Yeah. It's like, why haven't I got hair? Why aren't I 6'2"? You know? So, and for some people, it's like, why aren't I a girl? You know, or why aren't I a boy? It's all of these things. We're not necessarily, you know, it's important to remember, so we realize we're not in control of our lives. We have a delusion because we get to make lots of choices that, you know, about what we do. How fast am I going to drive? You know, what books am I going to read? What movie am I going to see? What food am I going to eat? So we think these things mean we're in control, but really we're just taking opportunities that are available to us. But if you found yourself in the middle of the Sahara Desert, there's nowhere to go. There's no shops. There's no, you know, access. So you don't have this control. So it's good to remember we're not in control of our own lives. We're kind of riding the wave, if you like. If you like to go to the beach, you know, sometimes you catch a wave and it's like really pleasant. And if you get your timing wrong, the wave hits you in the head and pushes you down to the bottom, you know, and then you're trying to catch your breath. So just being humble about how much of your life is yours. See, we think it's me because we think I am. And so this is why Ajahn Chah would say the one who knows, because the one who knows is objective, right? So the ego is subjective. The ego is about trying to pull things in and also project. You know, so we have an ego. You see how some people walk, don't you? Very proud, you know, in different ways. And so we start to see that, this ego is my problem, you know, whereas other people want to build and reinforce their ego. And they want to make the world, try and control the world to make their ego happy. And when people do that, it usually leads to a lot of suffering because that kind of ego doesn't care about you. You know, it just wants you to give them what they want, you know, and to see them the way they want to be seen. Whereas once we start to become still, once we start to just nurture awareness, to not hang on to a sense of self, but just what is it like to just be aware, you know? And awareness, then you start to see, it's kind of like, it's like a hidden part of ourselves. You start to see that at the edges of the ego, the personality, it's not real. You start to see that it's something that we construct ourselves as a result of the world we live in. Yeah. So for instance, you know, when we talk about conditioning, if you grow up in a family where everyone shouts, you know, you're going to be shouty because that's how you communicate. You know, I've got Italian in-laws. Even when they want, you know, just a simple thing, pass the salt, you know, they're just loud, you know, it's what we call, you know, expressive, so to speak. Other people like to be quiet and peaceful. But all of these things, when you start to just have awareness, where does that come from? You start to inquire. So mindfulness allows us to start to look, to see what's really there, rather than trying to see what you want to see there, if that makes sense. Looking for evidence of how wonderful you are, you know. Oh, look, I can get this much meditation. I must be very special. I must be on my way. But, you know, we know from the teachings of the Buddha, even if your meditation is world class, that's no guarantee you're going to get enlightened. So if you remember Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, he had all 4 jhanas. You know, he could apparently, you know, according to the suttas, he could fly through the air, he could read the mind, but he wasn't enlightened. And in fact, he ended up in hell because his ego took hold of these achievements. So rather than saying, and then so Devadatta's ego was telling him, well, I'm better than the Buddha, and he's making mistakes. Everyone should be vegetarian, you know? And the Buddha skillfully said, no, it's we're a begging order. You know, people offer us the food that they have. So we're not here to, you know, pick and choose. We just accept what's given without judgment. Whereas Devadatta said, no, only vegetarian. All monks should be vegetarian. And so the Buddha didn't agree. And so Devadatta caused a split in the Sangha. And then he even tried to organize, you know, with, I think it was King Bimbisara, tried to, tried to kill the Buddha with the elephant. Enraged the elephant, got the elephant really drunk, you know, started poking it with those long sticks and stuff, and then set him free right in front of the Buddha. So fortunately, the Buddha's metta was such that he was able to bring peace to the elephant's mind. So I like that story. But Devadatta himself, even with all the deep meditation that he'd achieved, ended up going to hell. And in the end, the Buddha said he will be reborn as a Buddha, but as a silent Buddha. So whereby just by offering to him at that time, you make good karma. But the message of the story is meditation is only one part of the journey. So awareness is what brings us into mindfulness. Mindfulness is what takes us to wisdom. Wisdom is what allows us to become free by seeing and feeling the truth of the Dhamma. By really starting to connect with this sense of impermanence, just through your own body starting, like in my case, starts to slow down. I seem to have a different ache and pain every day. I don't know, why is that hurting today? What did I do,
Where did it come from?
Yeah, exactly. So, diabetic now and, things like this. So you start to realize the impermanence of health and well-being. And then, no matter how much you look after yourself, eventually age will take over, because none of us know anyone who's 150 years old, still running around the neighborhood, riding a bike, doing a 1K swim every day. No, I think if you get to 100, you're doing well. If you're more than 70 years old, you're in the top 1% of the world's population in age.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
1%.
Yeah, if you're over, I think it's 75. If you're over 75, you're in the 1% of the world's population.
Kalian umur di atas 75 nggak boleh tahu. Belum kan? Belum ya?
Very elite, very special.
They are not 75.
They're getting there. Yeah.
They are below 75.
Yeah. I mean, recently my father, he's 93. And up until this time last year, he was still living at home by himself, driving down to the shops. And then unfortunately, one morning had a fall and cracked his hip. And then while he was in hospital, caught COVID. And he's never been able to get his independence back. We now have to, my brother tried to, care for him in his home, but unfortunately my father's lost that ability to be able to do things for himself. He can still, his mind's still okay, but he just needs a lot of help to get up and down and walk and, things. And I talk to him every week and, it's just the little things, because he's been used to looking after himself. My mother died about 20 years ago. So, he's an independent man. He knows how to cook and clean and do all these things. And so now, he has to wait for people. If he rings the bell, it's like, oh, I'll be back in 5 minutes. And he's like, that's what the last person said 2 hours ago, little things like not even being able to get a nice cup of tea. It's always cold or lukewarm, because they make it and then it sits there for 10 minutes and they give it. So all these little kind of, disagreeable kind of things, because he no longer has that capacity to care for himself. And it changed so quickly, like it just changed so very quickly. And despite the fact that, it was our wish, my brother really wanted to have him at home so he could, be there and enjoy his last days. But it's just not possible at the moment because, he works full time, his wife works full time. It's, not many people have enough money to have a full-time carer. And in fact, you'd need to have 2 or 3 because people need to go home as well, So fortunately, he's, having worked in nursing homes, he's in a pretty good one. It seems to look after him well, but it's not perfect, So as I said, it's all those little things that he can't control anymore. And this is what happens if we lose. So how can we prepare ourselves? And the only way we can really prepare ourselves is by preparing the mind, by having a mind that's able to be patient, to, accepting. Yeah, that's right. And to see it's not personal. See, we take things personally. We always think it's kind of a reflection on me, And so what that can mean is, if you're an insecure person, you're always trying to make other people happy, because that's how you feel like I have to. And if things go wrong, there's some, I'm fortunate to be a senior manager in my normal work. So I have a lot of staff and people always say sorry to me, even if it's my fault. They'll say sorry, because, I'm the boss and I go, no, you didn't do anything wrong. That's my fault. I'm sorry, for making it harder for you. And it's like, you know, but that's a problem for some people because it's like, oh, no, you know, like, because they have these expectations of how to be and they don't want to be in trouble. And, you know, and I try to be a nice, kind, generous boss, you know, not make people feel like this. I'm watching, you know, what time did you leave today? You know, what time did you get here? You know, I don't care about any of those things, as long as you get the sort of work you're doing. And I know that the people where I work have a very hard job. So I want to make it easier for them to do their work. I don't want them to make me feel good about being a boss. If you see what I mean, you sort of change it around a bit. So just, I don't take being a boss seriously because I realize I'm just another person too, you know. I just happen to be in this position. One day someone else will be in it, you know. So it's not me, it's just part of the world I'm in at this time. And, you know, through good fortune and, you know, I just happened to pick an area of work that I really liked. So I just followed my heart into doing things, in this case, that involved a lot of compassion by trying to help others. And that's what made, you know, so I think that's good karma. I'm glad I had those instincts, you know, rather than the sort of karma where you hate everybody. I wouldn't want to be Donald Trump, you know. His mind would be angry all the time, on fire, on fire.
Some people still love it.
Yeah, I know. And their minds are on fire too. I've thought about that a lot. But, you know, they're attracted because they think he's like them.
Oh, yeah, yeah. This is this
They-
sort of role model.
Yeah, yeah. They see their quality. And it's the same way we might like a good monk. You know, we see someone that we would like to be like, that makes us, inspires us and helps us to see things in a new way, you know. So that's what attracts us. And other people are attracted, and that's their, you know. But it's hard not to see it as a lesser way of being, because it's all built on anger and resentment and you know, punishing and cruelty. So what we do as a layperson is we try to nurture the qualities that allow the mind to be quiet. Because when the mind's quiet, well, then it can see more clearly and it's less reactive. You know, we're less impulsive because we learn to understand ourselves. And we know that, well, you know, if I do end up yelling at this person, what's that going to do? Nothing, you know? And yelling actually makes me feel bad. So the other side of what you start to see when you start to nurture wholesomeness is you see not only the harm that you do when we're expressing anger towards others, you start to see the harm you do to yourself when you allow anger to take over. So I had the opportunity, one of the first experiences I had when I was doing my first rains retreat, walking through the forest and stuff. And I was just thinking about stuff. And then for some reason I had a memory about something that made me angry at the time. I can't even remember what it was. But what I remember is the way the anger felt in my head and in my body. And I thought, oh, this is very unpleasant. I don't like feeling like this, do you know? So with less awareness, you actually express the anger because you want to get it out of you, do you know? Whereas once you start to develop awareness, you start to see that it's, you know, as the Buddha said, it's exactly as the Buddha said, when you are angry with another person, it's like picking up a hot rock. You know, you're going to get burned if you pick up a hot rock to throw at someone else. So allowing that anger into your mind or expressing it rather than trying to cool it down actually creates dukkha in your own self. So you're doing two things. You're creating dukkha outside yourself and you're creating dukkha inside yourself, because you might create resentment in this other person. So then they want to come and, you know, make you unhappy. So that's my kind of offering to everyone today as a layperson. I offer my core insights into the Dharma and karma on behalf of my mother and father. It's a lovely opportunity to do something that hopefully has some benefit to them. And I thank you all for your patience and kindness in listening to me. If there's any questions, I'm happy to give you my impression. But don't worry if you don't have any questions. Yeah, just be kind to yourself. It's a long journey. You know, just because it goes wrong one day, that's not important. It's the long way to go. And if you keep just heading in the right direction, I can say that, you know, the understanding does grow, you know, just by being gentle and honest with yourself, just by cultivating awareness for its own sake.
So, question. How do you balance managing no expectations and voicing something out because you think that it has to be said out there?
Yeah.
Whistle or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is sort of like a question about integrity.
Yeah.
How to maintain integrity. And it's a big question because some people have a lot of integrity and they might see something wrong that they should speak up about, but maybe fear, you know, maybe they're not in a very strong position. Because not everywhere, see in the West, we've got a system, and even here in the West, whistleblowers tend to end up paying the price. But imagine if you're in a, you know, a small, poor village and the head villager is the one who's corrupt. What are you going to do about it? You could end up dead, you know. So sometimes discretion, there's a term, discretion is the better part of valor. It may not be the right time and it may be the right time. You can only be true to yourself. So for some people, when they see injustice, they can't stay quiet. They have to speak up. Like people are for Palestine at the moment, you know. You know, for a lot of us, all we see is the harm done to the children. You know, the religion, and this is why religion can be, as the Chinese, what did he say? Mao Zedong said, you know, poison. When it teaches you that, you know, the others are all bad and should be wiped out, you know, there's nothing, you know, it's like, there's nothing peaceful or rewarding about that. I don't understand how they can equate killing with being virtuous or religion, you know? If I was in a religion that demanded the death of other people, I hope I never end up in that position. This is why I was attracted to Buddhism. So in the end, though, you have to be true to yourself, and some people it's impossible, and they're willing to sacrifice their life for it. So you've got these examples in Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, in India, you know, great suffering, but on behalf of his people. Nelson Mandela, you know, sacrifice. These are great people, you know, that endured for the benefit of all. And sometimes it's just in the workplace. Maybe we've got, you know, my brother, for instance, a couple of years ago, took a new job. It was very exciting, had more money, more thing, but he ended up in a very toxic environment. He came from a very positive environment. So he was used to people being honest and straightforward and open. And he ended up where everyone's a little bit, you know, they've got cliques and stuff. And he lost it. Didn't last 3 months because they collectively got together. So, for instance, he called someone out. The thing that triggered it was he noticed several of the staff were quite racist. And so, you know, he goes to his manager. And the next thing, he's the one being kicked out, you know. But he, you know, he's in a good place now, and he would look back and say, well, I did the right thing. I'm glad I did it, you know. Even if it cost me my job, I'd rather do that than not be true to my values. But, you know, a little bit of self-preservation sometimes is important. It's not always the right time, but yeah, it depends on how true to yourself, how important that is at that time. But, you know, it'd be nice to say it's always important to speak up, but unfortunately, we know sometimes people pay an unfair price for that. You have to take it on context. If you've got support, that would be the first thing. Make sure you perhaps got support. You know, if you're in a toxic environment where you're the only one that sees something wrong, you're probably off better getting a different job somewhere else, so to speak. Just, yeah, leave them to their bit, leave them to it, you know.
That's what I've just done actually.
Yeah.
Giles. I just want to let you know that I came from a very toxic environment.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
So it was not in my family when I started the time. Bante akan that
Yeah.
no longer. And then he said that, yeah, it's better for me
Yes,
And now the job that I'm with is only for 12 months secondment, but I
Yeah.
feel a lot better. Yeah,
and that should lead to something good as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I said to my, and the previous that is also 7 months, only 7 months. And I can say to myself that
Hmm.
it feels that 7 months, 28 months in my substantive role is nothing compared to 7 months.
Yeah,
Yeah, it feels like nothing. I can understand how your brother did.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's easy to sleep at night.
And it feels good for him to work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Fortunately, he's, got a good reputation. He found another job very easily. And, being a bit humble, he doesn't need to be at the top. He's happy doing what he does, and, he gets enough, he gets paid enough to, look after himself and his family. So, again, it's about humbleness, how much do you need? So you start to look, I'm very aware, I'm a single person, I've got a whole house to myself. Everyone talks about the rent crisis. I don't know why. I've got a fantastic landlord. He hasn't put the price up in 3 years, and I'm living in a sort of the worst house in the best suburb, so to speak. The house does need a lot of work, but I'm in a really nice place, and paying a little bit below the market, so to speak, as we say. So whether that's good karma or good fortune, but I know I've got, I'm in a 2-bedroom house with a backyard in a pleasant kind of affluent suburb, so there's not drive-bys going on and sirens. I lived in the city for a while. There's sirens every night and people screaming and gunshots occasionally. And, I tried to, before my first big meditation retreat, I was living in a place called Darlinghurst. And right in the middle of sort of King's Cross and stuff. And I was in this like little apartment. I had the bottom corner. Unfortunately, it was also an area where the prostitutes would stand up, the street sex workers would stand on the street, so cars would drive around. So the first thing I noticed was, oh, they think you're doing it too, because, you're trying to get a park. And it's like, no, I just want a park. I'm not, I'm not trying to get anything else. I just want to park. And then the other thing is, like, I was doing a lot of meditating. I was getting up at 5 in. And like,
Will
like
you
the
be
first-
awake?
well, see, my building, I suddenly realized why. A lot of buildings had fences between them, so you couldn't go down the side, whereas my building didn't have a fence. So like one morning, and it happened regularly, nighttime and morning, I'm trying to meditate, I'm like sitting there, and it's like, what's that noise? And it's like the lady and her customer are down the side of the building having sex, So this is like 5:30 in, and this makes meditation very difficult. So when you talk about being in the right place, that's conducive to the practice. And so, but despite this, at the time, I was getting really good meditation every morning, and in the evening. And then I went to the monastery, and I couldn't sit for more than 10 minutes. Like I've gone from sitting 2 hours a day, come home from work, sit and meditate. First thing in the morning, get up, sit for an hour, meditate. I go to the monastery, 10 minutes, and it's like, like my mind was still all over the place. I really couldn't do it. I was quite upset. So I went to see Ajahn Brahm. And he said, well, the problem is when you're in the world's here, right? And if you meditate, you come down here, so it feels calmer. But he said, the monastery's already down here. So you're still well above. And so that's what I was picking up. The monastery with, the environment so calm and peaceful that even though my mind felt calm and settled in the city, when you go to a quiet place like the monastery, you suddenly realize how noisy it is. And so it took me 6 weeks of doing walking meditation. I used to do I was doing 6 to 8 hours of walking meditation a day. I'd get up at 4 in and do a couple of hours, and then do some more in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening. And after 6 weeks, my mind finally calmed down to where I could sit again. So that was very well.
I think it's probably
Would you
good.
move it again? So it's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then
Yeah.
it's like someone's throwing glass against the walls. The noise, all the extra sensory input really unsettles the mind. I couldn't sleep when I left the monastery. I couldn't sleep for a month because my mind was so agitated from all the noise in the city. You know, you go from everything's calm and peaceful, people talk to you quietly and softly, everything's very wholesome, and then you're in the city, get out of the way, idiot. You know, people screaming at you, beeping horns, you know, and pushing through. And so a noise, just the noise and the visual, you know, you're not looking at beautiful trees and, you know, a bit of a lake and rolling hills. And so my mind, it was like shattered glass had gone off in it, you know, it couldn't cope with all, because the senses are now reactivated.
Yeah.
So when you're on the monastery, the senses gradually calm down if you're lucky. And then you come into the world and the senses fire up. And so this is where, again, you start to see the process that you have to keep coming and going into it until eventually the changes are permanent, so to speak. You get more, so as the Buddha used to say, an unshakable peace of mind. So bit by bit, you learn to get better at protecting the mind and being at ease, being peaceful, not so triggered by all the rest of the world around you. So you're able to maintain a kind of calmness more when you're in the world. So you cultivate it day by day. It's like watering seed, putting a seed and watering that seed. And how do we water the seed? Through remembering the teachings, particularly the teachings that mean something to you. You know, remembering the goal, to have a calm and quiet mind, to be virtuous, to be compassionate, to be kind. And so you keep focusing on these things. And when you get it wrong, you acknowledge you get it wrong, you know, and what can you do better next time? Just by being honest and aware and just kind and patient. The more you cultivate these qualities, the more they take over, because that's the ones you're watering. If you water the weeds, anger, resentment, you know, restlessness and anxiety, they'll get stronger. But if you water the plants, you'll get the fruit. So that's.
Ada pertanyaan nggak? Sorry, nanti aku jelasin nanti aja. Iya, mau banget. Soalnya dia ngomong cepet bener, susah di depan. Any questions?
Sorry, maybe if you don't mind, do you mind sharing how you get introduced to Buddhism and why you finally decide to take Buddhism as your way of life?
Yeah, very easily. The teachings, you know, first time I heard life is suffering, I thought, yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, it's not that I'd suffered every day, you know, but I just knew instinctively, yeah, that's true. That's right. Life is suffering. It's not hard to see, is it? And even if you think, oh yeah, but some days, you know, you can get it right. But yes, that's right. It's not permanent. And as I said, it doesn't matter how rich and famous you are. Eventually, that too will fade away. All of us, and don't take your own life so seriously. This is one of the things I find. It's only just kind of recently occurred to me. Our lives are like, you've been to the beach. Have you ever been to the beach? You know, like, yeah. And you know, when the waves come in and the sand is all nice and smooth, right? You step on the sand, you leave a footprint. Think of that footprint as you. The next wave washes it away. And that's what our lives are like. We're a brief moment where we leave an impression on the sand, and then the next wave washes it away. And no one knows it was ever there or been there. Doesn't matter. You think of all the famous people that have ever been. How many are remembered? You know, it doesn't matter if you're a famous person here, there, or anywhere. I don't know anyone kind of famous in, you know, Germany or France. You know, I know a few people, but, you know, I don't think of them very often, if ever, you know. Same for Australians or Thais or Malaysians. There's all these famous kings and queens that have come and gone. How many of them are remembered? There's been thousands of them. We only ever remember the most recent. They fade away. They all fade away, like we fade away. I think I might have had a good bit of good karma. Because I'm English in background, my father's grandfather, my great-grandfather, was a Baptist. But and Baptists are a little bit like Buddhists, I assume. I don't know a lot about Baptists, but I assume they were. So he was, my great-grandfather was quite important in his town. He was in a kind of wealthy town. He used to lecture in photography. He was the postmaster general for a big area, big, wealthy area. And when I took my dad back to England, because we migrated to Australia in the early 60s, we were what were called 10-pound Poms. I took Dad back after like 40 odd years, his first trip back. And we went to try and find his grandfather's grave. And we looked, it was only a small, it was only a kind of a small graveyard. It was probably 100 square meters, so there was only about 200 or 300 graves in there. And anyway, so, half an hour walking up and down, so couldn't find the grave. So then we went to the council, and sure enough, they keep the records of where everyone's buried, because I think he died in the 60s, and they look it up and go, yep, this is where he is. This is the bit where he is. So we get the, it gives you the number, left, right, number 6. So he was buried on a kind of where the footpath comes. So it was like a little cross, but he'd elected to have an unmarked grave. So we'd actually walked past it several times, because all it was a patch of grass. There wasn't even a plaque. And that was his conscious decision. He and his wife, they chose, even though they did a lot of good, they were generous and practitioners and did all the generosity. Their humbleness was that we don't need to be remembered. So they were in an unmarked grave. It's just about a square meter of grass. That was it. And I was astounded by that, so I kind of thought, wow, is that karma? That must be a bit of a karmic connection, because that's such a Buddhist thing to do. I've got the same, even before I'd seen that, I kind of thought, yeah, I don't need to be remembered. I don't care. Just leave me out in the forest, or, throw the ashes wherever, I don't need that sense. So maybe I've just got a bit of history, but it just appealed to me. It just felt good in the heart. So I was lucky in that. And that's why I think I agree with Ajahn Brahm about, he always says, you think you're here by chance? You think you're a Buddhist by chance? He says, no, it starts a long, long time ago, And he said, it's like being on a plane going from, say, London to Sydney. It doesn't matter if you're in first class, middle class, poor class. You're all on the same plane. It's got the same destination. And the destination's, hopefully enlightenment, the end of that cycle of birth and death. So you must have good karma.
Yes, yes. Yeah, very nice, yeah.